When your criteria for making a moral decision is judging the effect of your decision on the people around you and on the community, you're far more likely to be a moral, ethical person.
In Canada, there are a group of atheists who refer to themselves as atheists with a humanist approach. They use language like personal responsibility and reason with compassion. Their godless lives require courage. Hello, I'm Maurice Thompson, and welcome to Man Alive. We're in a time of a great religious shift. In our modern world of technology and secularism, and a global awareness of whole families of religions, and a scientific awakening to the deep mysteries and conundrums of the universe, perhaps we are outgrowing the traditional religious ways of contemplating God. And if this is true, the atheists that you will meet today are very much part of this religious shift, because they're not atheists through laziness or cynicism. Rather, they've come to disbelieve the traditional faiths through an intelligent and compassionate questioning, and to turn aside from religious ideas that can fill your life with meaning and purpose requires courage. Albert Schweitzer once said, "Religion has stood in the way of much of mankind's spiritual development, and too often religions have been used to set humanity against itself." These atheists are open and inclusive, and they fully embrace their responsibility to create a moral and a just sense of mankind.
Coming when you're gonna die, and my friend, you were created to be eternal.
I just don't get religion. I just don't get the concept of the supernatural.
Religion, of course, is the use of the imagination in order to conjure up things that are not there and then call them truth.
The traditional ethicists within our society are not equipped to deal with these new situations.
People generally tend to see and assume that without religion, one cannot be good, one cannot be moral, one cannot be ethical.
Hell without Jesus Christ. Hell, my friend, without salvation. Away from the presence of the Lord. A pure torment for eternity, 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 eternity.
We would sit in church every Sunday, and everyone would have to ask for forgiveness. There was this assumption that you had done something wrong. And so I started to think, well, you know, if I leave church and get hit by a truck and end up in the hospital for a week in a coma, miraculously recover and come back to church the next Sunday, I will still have sinned.
I was still using the terms God and religion at that point, and I said, well, Thanksgiving is the time that we thank God for all the wonderful things that we have, and all the wonderful food we're going to eat, and we thank God. And Melanie said, Mommy, why doesn't God give poor people food? I was speechless, and I'm very rarely speechless. I was totally speechless. And I thought for a minute, and I thought, okay, Melanie, God doesn't give us that food. Maybe we are thankful that we are healthy and smart enough to get jobs, to go out and work and make some money so we can buy the food. And that's really what we're thankful for.
For me, religion was very much something that was an answer to the problems of this world. It was in terms of that and wondering what is the actual answer that religion has to these things. That came to me as a, you know, as a very central issue in my loss of religious belief.
I did believe in a God until I was about 14, and during a religious education course, a lesson at the grammar school, some fellow said, some surly guy behind me said, there's no God, he said. And I thought, and that was it. That's all it took. Somebody said there's no God in a sneering voice. And since from that day to this, there's been no God in my life.
I grew up in a liberal Jewish home where at the same time that some of these ceremonies and holidays were celebrated, there was no serious dogma. So at the same time I was encouraged to think for myself, I was also part of the Jewish tradition.
Well, I was born in a slum parish in Dublin, Ireland, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. My father was a Protestant minister. We had clerics, bishops and archbishops and deans and deacons and reverends and canons at our table all the time. They were the significant others, as we call them, in my life. And I've had a purpose. I was always raised to think it had a purpose. And the job is to find out, the task is to find out, what is the purpose? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of the world? Maybe it doesn't have one.
My parents and grandparents on my mother's side are quite religious. They all belong to the United Church of Canada. My grandparents were the second couple to be married in the church. All of the politics of whether or not the Presbyterian Church would join the other churches were a big part of who was speaking to who in my family.
My parents were sort of, I think they had some kind of vague belief, but they didn't go to church. And I was very introspective as a child, and I used to speculate about big questions. And I used to frighten myself to death about the concept of space and time. And I used to worry a lot about being dead.
I know that my parents are quite disappointed in me. And that for a long time my mother believed that I would come back and that I was a closet Christian. But as time has gone on and she started to realize that that's not going to happen.
I think there was a positive effect from some of the Jewish traditions, which are very healthy and very positive, and so I think I was very much influenced by those things. But those things aren't limited to the Catholic or Jewish or Protestant tradition or Islamic. They're very universal. Your life has been comforting or somehow circumscribed by the tenets of religion, by the laws of religion, and you choose to leave it. It's a very frightening withdrawal process.
I think it was a sense of total disorientation, not knowing where your place was in life. I remember even when I went to college, wondering, I'd come to the point where I wondered, can I know anything at all?
A lot of people who do not profess a religion still carry around some of the vestiges of their early indoctrination, which can recreate feelings of guilt and discomfort in their lives when they do something which they know rationally is perfectly right, but they still have a feeling that there's something not quite right about it.
I think part of the feeling of isolation is there's no building to go to do this with other people. You're, in a sense, separating yourself, even psychologically, from your family, from your upbringing. You run the risk of hurting your family. You've chosen something that isn't what they hoped for you. And you don't know anybody else who thinks this.
At this point, but I'm bring to your attention when you speak of values, that our values are made up of oftentimes other moral sentiments coming into collection, and so oftentimes what wins out is the strongest feeling.
I discovered that humanism existed about 4 years ago, but I've always been one. I didn't know it. I didn't know anybody else on earth thought as I did.
Why is there this discrepancy between what the scientists think and what the general public, including unfortunately science teachers, believe? And another question
One of the purposes of the Secular Family Network is to reinforce rational thinking to the point that our young people can withstand societal pressure without surrendering their intellectual integrity.
The problem with teaching kids ethics is that you have to set the example. So it's obviously, it's nice if you have a church system that you can send kids to. They'll do it. You don't have to actually practice it yourself. And as adults, we have a tendency towards hypocrisy at the best of times.
It's possible to be an atheist without being a humanist, but I don't think it's possible to be a humanist without being an atheist.
We began, I believe, to give a list of virtues: prudence, punctuality, and temperance you mentioned. Do you, in fact, have a sort of a cogent list that you could continue with, that you've identified?
I think what we do as humanists is we take the best of what a religious spiritualism would have to offer, but we do not take the supernatural side of it.
If you, for example, tell people to be tolerant and open and whatever...
Not tolerant, because
but
I'm opposing the word tolerance.
Okay.
While you are tolerating, that means you are wanting to suppress your own self. But while you are cultured to be accommodated with other people, and
our sense of morality, our sense of ethics, is an evolutionary process. It's based, it has survival value.
I think that all the great religious leaders of the past, even though they said they went up on the mountain and maybe they even thought they had gotten a word from on high, were really obtaining wisdom from what they knew of the sum total of the experience of the human race.
I live in Abbotsford, which is sort of regarded as the Bible Belt of British Columbia, and I used to be a fundamentalist minister. I think I look at the consequences of action much more than sort of having sort of a list of rules and regulations as to what people can or shouldn't do, you know. So what I'm doing, how is that going to affect people around me and the world around me? I think I've been moving into a more global perspective as to what's happening rather than a provincial or a nationalistic perspective. And so, you know, in other words, I think we're on this planet together. We're going to have to learn to survive together, and what I and others do is going to impact that.
I am always open, and this is again a big issue we have with religionists. I'm always open to being proved to be wrong. We have no dogma. And if somebody can prove to me tomorrow that there's a God, God bless him.
When you say, well, how can you develop an ethic without God? It's based on society, it's based on our abilities, what we can do with the world and what we should do with the world.
In North America, if you take it in the sense of if you're middle class, you say to your kid, do anything to get ahead. You know, you have to make money. Well, we do. In our society, we say to the kid, follow the rules as long as you get rich. You know, you have to make more money than daddy did or whatever. Well, that's not an ethical frame that is defensible, but it's a cultural value that we have in North America. I mean, kids are brought up to be consumers. They will steal shirts, running shoes, and whatever because their society's social values are to consume. Well, their parents should be fighting that somehow.
I am a part of this world, whether it's my family, my school, my community, and how I behave affects it. And as a humanist, that's what helps you make your decision about how you're going to behave. So I don't need the supernatural to tell me that. I have the ethics that I've learned through experience.
It's a lot easier to figure out how to develop an ethical system with your next-door neighbor and please your next-door neighbor than it would be to please someone you've never met, never heard of, and will give you absolutely no immediate response for your actions.
And for biodiversity loss and population growth among the scientists.
It's harder to be truly moral if you're religious, because you believe in certain standard truths and certain rules about life.
They voted population growth as the biggest threat to the world.
If you
followed by the loss
look
of
at
plant
the
diversity.
official Catholic position on sexuality, it is unethical. You're supposed to just have sex and let God decide when you have children.
Prolonged longevity, never mind immortality, on a large scale carries more moral, ethical, political, economic, religious, and cultural dilemmas than a dog has fleas in summer. Unless we could manage to slow the birth rate down to -10, we'd be running into some big, big problems.
The traditional ethicists within our society are not equipped to deal with these new situations.
If you're going to have a role in determining how we utilize these new technologies in the future, you got to be in the game. Those people of traditional faith who say all of this technology is evil and we must turn to God for our answers, that'll effectively put them out of the game. And I'm sure that some people in the biotech companies would be more than happy to have more people out of the game to leave them alone. But it's our job as humanists, if we're concerned about social justice, to be in the game and to be concerned about the socio-political and cultural ramifications of all this stuff.
It's a very primitive way of thinking, of explaining experience, and natural for a very small child before the age of 2. But it's not a natural thing for a whole culture to be operating in that way. And we are. People were quite hopeful, historians of ideas who write about the Renaissance period. Many of them said things like, this is the adolescence of the human race, finally. That we are moving beyond childhood in terms of culture. We're moving into adolescence. And the Enlightenment period that followed, very hopeful kind of time. But I can't help but feel that there has been considerable regression since that time.
There are no hard and fast rules for every situation a person enters. And when your criteria for making a moral decision is judging the effect of your decision on the people around you and on the community, you're far more likely to be a moral, ethical person. I don't do it because it says so in the book.
People who tend to be dogmatic themselves also tend to be responsive to authority, and also to appreciate having authority imposed upon them.
The non-religious life stance is one that demands an enormous responsibility on the part of the individual.
To actively seek information, you have to actively think hard. I mean, religious people might call that prayer, you know, thinking hard. But I would say that I'm thinking hard myself. I'm thinking about the things that I've learned and the people that I've spoken to and the experiences that I've had, and I'm making a decision based on that.
Under a religious ethic, you can condone actions which are very, very harmful, such as I say, burning blasphemers and stoning adulterers, and you can condemn actions which are beneficial. There's no appeal to the effects that your belief system has on other people or yourself.
And if I mess up, it's my fault. And I will pick up and I will try again. But it's my fault. It's my responsibility when I make that decision and I perform that action. That's tougher. It's much tougher.
It is absolutely essential that we have something to put in the place of religion. It's not enough just to reject religion. We have to have something that takes up the slack.
I sometimes wonder how some humanists fill the hole that that is left by not having a belief system. I know how I do it, but as I say, it's through art, it's through sport, it's through health, and so on.
I don't think that people will grow up Moral people in quotes, because that can mean different things, but people who are decent to each other, treat each other well, and do responsible things, you know, for their families and so on. These things have to be taught.
Time is coming when you're gonna die. And my friend, you were created to be eternal. Eternal. My friend, everything that God creates is to be eternal. It's gonna last forever, my friend. It's gonna last forever.
It takes a certain amount of courage to be an atheist because we have to live with the fact, or what we think is a pretty well know is a fact, that when we're dead, we're dead.
Putting ethical acorns away for a better day that happens after you die could be really kind of sad if nothing happens after you die.
I sure don't want to die. I believe that when you die, I don't at this point believe you go anywhere, you sort of just end. I believe that you live on in the memories of the people you affected, your family, your friends. So I definitely believe that if you want to call that the soul, I don't, but that the way you, well maybe, I mean the way you affected people, what your essence is, definitely has affected people and lives on in them.
The best thing that I can think of is to leave the world maybe a little bit better when I leave. I feel, for instance, that every life is a thread that is being woven into the fabric, this interconnected web of nature. And we're all weaving, with the process of our years, we're weaving this thread into the fabric. And we can either make it a strong thread or a rotten, weak one.
And I believe you can change the world in a little ways by making sure your own house is in order, that you change yourself as much as possible.
We can't hope to have a major effect on this earth, but we can all definitely hope to have a very small effect among the people and the people that we connect with. Those things have meaning. We make our meaning.
And that's our program for this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm R.H. Thompson for Man Alive. Next week on Man Alive.
She was given a 5 to 15% chance of recovery. I'm not dying from cancer.